President Fann and Senator Gray, let's first, we'll talk about a lot of things here today. Let's talk about the upcoming legislative session and what you hope to accomplish.
Well, it's going to be an interesting one. Once again, we are still holding the House and the Senate by one-person margins, which creates a challenge. But I believe that if we all work together in a bipartisan manner and we work for our constituents and kind of leave our personal agendas out of it, we should have a great session.
What are some of the things that are important to you?
Well, one thing is our economy is doing really, really well. So we do have some great revenues coming in. Once again, much of it is one-time revenues, but that will give us an opportunity to be able to fund more infrastructure projects, fund some of those things that we've had to let slide since the last recession. We're going to be talking issues about, where do we go here with COVID and mask mandates and CRT and all those issues that just keep coming up. Rick, what other things do you see coming up?
Well, I think it's obviously we're a legislative body, so every member is kind of an independent agent, so they're going to have unique issues that are personal to them. So that always brings in a mix of issues. But yeah, there'll be election things, there'll be tax things. I think a lot of the same type of venue of bills that we've had in the past.
Wanted to ask you about the ballot review. Brnovich, still looking at the reports from this. Some people said it showed no wrongdoing. Others said, oh, look at what this showed. What do you think that the ballot review showed?
Well, I can tell you I know exactly what it showed and things that they didn't. So let me back up first and foremost and just say, for the record, once again, for the 100th time, this was never about Trump. It was never about anything other than election integrity. That is all it's ever been about. We had a lot of questions, and it wasn't just in 2020. In 2018, 2016, the Democrats were all claiming that there were problems with the election. Somebody said, if you had to do this all over again, what would you have done? And I said, I would have done it 4 years ago when the Democrats thought there was a problem. Then everybody would have been on board. But what we did show is the fact that there were election laws that were not followed. Now, you know, I have never ever said fraud, because you cannot claim fraud unless you can prove that someone intentionally did something. I don't have that proof. That's up to Attorney General Brnovich to decide these mistakes that were made, were they because somebody did them intentionally, or were they just lackadaisical, didn't follow the laws? But we do know that chain of custody wasn't followed. We know that they did not follow procedures on some of the duplicate ballots. We know that when they said they only used 4 types of ballot paper, so there was no way there was bleed through, or there was no way that there was any problems with the ballots. We know that's incorrect. We know that there was over 200,000 adjudicated ballots because the machines couldn't read them. That's over 11%. The normal is less than 1%. So we found that if we don't do audits, if we don't hold people accountable for following the rules, these are the problems that come up, and this is why people have questions about the integrity of our elections.
Had Trump won, would you have still pushed for the audit?
Absolutely, yes, absolutely.
So what kinds of reforms will come as a result of all of this?
Some of the suggestions, and we're hoping this is bipartisan. I don't know why this became so political, other than the fact that Trump was involved, and he's a highly chargeable commodity in the media. But I'm hoping that these are good bipartisan reforms. We need to purge our voter rolls a little bit. Now, I'm not saying we're going to take good people off the rolls, never. But we know that there are tens of thousands of ballots that are out there that the people don't live here anymore, or they are deceased. And the comment from the recorder is, well, it's not our fault. They're supposed to let us know when they move. Well, that's not an answer, right? Not everybody does what they're supposed to do either, but we have to do our jobs. We can do better in security. We can do better in maintaining those ballots and those chain of custody, making sure that there are, security tapes on those ballots. Make sure that those ballots are all accountable for. And again, back to the duplicates ballots, you better follow procedure, because I can't honestly tell you whether those were duplicates or not, because they didn't follow the rules and they weren't numbered the way they were supposed to be. So I think there's a lot of things we can do to restore the confidence back into our election system.
I would think duplicates, people not living here, things like that would be easy bipartisan.
You would think so, yeah.
Do you think it will be? And how can those things get through to begin with?
Good question, Scott. I hope that it's bipartisan. I hope that they don't make this a partisan issue, which is difficult. It's an election year, so everybody's going to be wanting to take pot shots at each other, which is sad. We should all be working together. But yeah, this is not a Republican issue. This is election integrity. And I would think that I don't care what party you are, you want to know that your ballot is safe, it's secure, it's being counted accurately. So whoever wins, if it was Biden, fine. If it was Trump, fine. We just want to know that whoever won, they won legitimately because we followed the rules and we followed procedures.
It just seems like from the outside looking in, like cyber ninjas declared bankruptcy and just there was secrecy. I mean, what was up with all that?
Well, again, very political, very charged in the media as well as everybody else. So yes, they did file bankruptcy, or so I was told yesterday. There were still a lot of funds that were not received from outside sources, grassroots groups that said that they would make sure that anything and above our contract would be covered. A lot of that is because it became so expensive for maybe some of your listeners and viewers. What you may not know is from day one, I asked the Board of Supervisors, let's do this together. Let's pick an auditor together, a forensic auditor. Do not move the ballots. Do not move those machines. Let's do it there. Let's answer these questions. If these rumors out there about ballots and this and that and the other aren't true, let's show them it's not true and say it's wrong. If we find problems, let's fix the problems. That's all we ever wanted to do, the Senate wanted to do. You saw, as you know, it became very contentious and to the point where they, loaded up ballots in the back of a rental truck and said, where do you want us to dump them off at? So the amount of money that was spent that was never anticipated for renting the Coliseum for months, the 24-hour security inside and out for months and months, much less all of the other workers and everything else had to be done, far exceeded what anybody thought it would cost. And it never would have happened if we could have just done it with Maricopa County at their facilities.
Senator Gray, what are your thoughts on the audit and how it turned out?
Well, I'd echo what the president said. I think it is disappointing that we couldn't come together and have a joint effort to evaluate. Again, I come from a business background. Actually, we both come from business backgrounds. You always revise your system. You're always looking for continuous improvement. And when it comes to people's votes, and we had so many people that were feeling like their votes were disenfranchised, that's one of the reasons that drove us is we need to make sure that they know their votes count. The sad part about it is with all the things that we found, we can't go out there and assure them that there wasn't any problems because there were. And so again, when you've got duplicates and they're both accepted, it's one of those things where it is the responsibility of the legislature to enact laws to make sure that our elections are fair and accurate and nobody's disenfranchised. And the bottom line comes down to if you or somebody else voted a certain way and then you've got a bunch of votes that aren't appropriate, that voted opposite of your votes were disenfranchised. So if you've got 1 million people and they all get to vote, that's the way it should be. But it wasn't. And so again, it could have been done so much better and without the cost if we had worked together to just say, our goal here is just to evaluate, and if there were problems, to correct them with future legislation. And that's been our attitude all along. From the very beginning, that's been our attitude. We have that responsibility as the legislature to fulfill that role. And we had people come in, as you know, saying, you should overturn this, you have the power. Well, we have the power to set up statutes, which we've done, and who qualifies and so forth. Those things were put in place. Now what we've done with this is try to look at it again to say what worked and what didn't, and where do we need to correct. Anybody that doesn't support that, it boggles my mind of what rationale they could use. I don't want to check our system. Well, they brought in a director of elections because the previous election had some serious questions. So they in a sense, acknowledged that there were some problems. So I don't understand why we wouldn't all want to know what's fair and right, and if there's a problem, let's correct it. But again, unfortunately, politics comes into play, and it doesn't skew toward just the obvious facts. It skews toward whatever your political shading is, and that's unfortunate. But again, when we addressed the supervisors from the very beginning, it was all about, let's evaluate this. Let's make sure of what's happened is what was done correctly, and if not, then we need to make some changes.
You mentioned the past couple of years has been extremely difficult. Talk about that in terms of, for you and maybe what the outside public doesn't know in getting things done and dealing with politics.
Yeah, it's, you know, I've been doing this a lot of years. I first started in politics 28 years ago, serving on a local level, Vice Mayor of Prescott for 4 years, and then a 3-term mayor for Chino Valley before I came down here to the state. That's on top of doing my business. You know, politics never was as volatile as it is right now. We may have had differences of opinions. We may have had different viewpoints on bills or issues, and we would have those discussions. But I do think, and I blame some of this on social media. We've noticed once social media, between Twitter and Facebook and all of those platforms that came up, it's just become so much more nasty, right? There's so many people out there that feel like they can put anything out there. I've never seen so many 4-letter words in my entire life as what I see out there on social media. And they think it's okay to do that, whereas before, you don't normally do that when you talk to somebody face to face like we're doing right now. So we've lost that connection, and that's what's happening in politics right now. Because of what's going on in social media, what's going on with our constituents and everything in politics going on, the rhetoric has just gotten out of control. And it's noticeable. It's noticeable on the House floor and to some extent on the Senate floor. And my goal is what I've been doing as Senate President for the last 3 years is to try and keep that out of our building, keep it off of that floor. Let's keep that decorum. Let's keep that mutual respect for each other's opinions and get through that, because the people elected us here to do a job and represent them, not to act like a bunch of children on the floor.
And people always talk about being bipartisan. New members come in, you know, they say their goal is to be bipartisan and get rid of politics, but it doesn't seem like it ever happens. What is the answer? How? And you even mentioned the upcoming session. If you can set the politics aside, how do we get through that?
I'm going to turn that over to Senator Gray.
Well, I think one of the things that people don't realize is they look at politicians and go, this is their problem, this is their fault, but yet they're driven by their base. I remember one interview where they were talking to somebody else, not me, about the whole immigration thing, and that person said, well, this is where my district is. This is the values of my district. And I won't mention names, but I remember when I first came into the legislature, there was a small business type bill, and there was a Democrat member who I had been involved in a committee with, and he voted against that. And so this was my first session, and so I went up to him like I did with a lot of other people. If I had a question of like, was I missing something? And so I asked him, I said, did you just not like that bill, or was that because of your district? And he just kind of looked at me and it's like, yeah, it was his district. You know, he's a small businessman. He knew that was good. But you have basically more and more of the base on both sides that are getting more vitriolic. And again, social media exacerbates that. And then the media gets involved and exacerbates that. And so you have all of this energizing in the wrong direction. And it's very difficult for those of us that want to say, let's focus on the policy. Let's be rational, take the emotion out, let's focus on the policy. It's very difficult when there's so much emotion involved everywhere with every entity that is involved in this process.
And I'd like to add something at this point too. We have a really, really great minority leader in the Senate, Senator Rebecca Rios, and her assistant leader is Lupe Contreras, Senator Contreras. both amazing people to work with. They've been around long enough that they understand the dynamics of politics and understand that it's important that we sit down and we talk together and try and work through things, because they've got members of their caucus just like we do that can be a little more one-sided or the other, and they're dealing with the same thing on their side. So we work closely with them. We're very lucky to have them here.
Senator Gray, you mentioned the border. Let's talk about that. What are your plans in the upcoming session? It seems like our federal government is not doing much at the Arizona border with Mexico. What's going to be talked about and discussed and hopefully solved in the session?
Well, I think that's been a problem since I've been involved in the legislature,
Yeah.
and before that with the whole 1070 thing. It's a problem, again, that really needs to be solved by the feds, and they don't seem to want to solve it effectively. We had all of that material sitting down there to help control that, and yet, now it just sits there. So it really comes down to leadership and having the right kind of leadership that has that power. And that's one of the frustrating things about being in the legislature. And we've talked with some members about this. We have power to do certain things, or I should say we have the authority to do certain things, but if we don't have the votes, then we don't have the power. And so solving a problem like the border isn't something that we in the legislature, a state legislature, can just say, we're going to take care of this. We have, I think, again, since I've been down here, we've been, very open to doing everything we can. I think we've done as much as we could. The governor is working on this now. I think it just needs to be a joint effort, again, of people going, how do we solve this problem? And one, acknowledging there's a problem. But again,
Well, I think everybody acknowledges that there's an issue.
But it's mind-boggling to me, and just looking at it logically, is the whole thing about vaccinations, and okay, we're going to stop people from flying into our country, but we could care less about million people walking across the border whether they're vaccinated or not. It's just there's just a illogicalness to it all, and to me, it's one of those things that's been used as a political tool. It's not about solving the problem, it's how can we use this as a political tool. And that has been obviously on the federal level. If it was up to us in Arizona, we would solve that.
And I'd love to add something on that one as well, because this is something that it does anger me. And I think people need to speak out more, and they need to put more pressure on our congressmen and on the federal level. Is, first of all, the federal government is breaking our own laws by allowing this to continue. This isn't just a handful of people seeking asylum. This is open flowing borders, and nobody's doing anything about it. Literally, the governor is down there doing a press conference and people are walking in behind him. That is ludicrous. When we talk about the code and the vaccines, we have a government that is now firing public safety officers, military personnel, lockdowns, everything, because they're trying to force a vaccine mandate on us. They're trying to force all the... So American citizens, tax-paying American citizens who follow the laws under normal circumstances, we're the ones losing our jobs, being forced to be vaccinated, being forced out of the military. That's a crying shame. But yet we're letting hundreds of thousands of people break the law, come into our country, and not only are we not making sure that they have safe backgrounds to know that they're not here to create another 9/11, not only are we not checking to make sure they don't have COVID or anything, but they're getting lost in the system out there. And now, on top of that, while we're losing our jobs, they're getting government assistance because they don't have any jobs. What is happening to our country? This is not America.
Do you also believe it's up to the feds to take care of that?
I believe, my personal opinion is, I hope we get our colleagues to again, bipartisan, because this is not a Republican issue. This is an American issue. I would like to see some of our monies used to enforce our borders. I realize that we have limitations about actually on the border because of the federal property, but I do believe if we can give our sheriffs down there, if we can, the trespassing that is going on ranchers' properties down there is just out of control. We should be able to help support our ranchers. We should be able to help support the property owners down there, either through drones or more sheriff's coverage down there, anything it would take to help protect our country and our property owners.
You mentioned the vaccine and the mandates, and President Biden's mandate is tied up in court right now. Where do you stand on a mandate, and how are you going to handle that in this session?
I don't think that Americans should be mandated that. Do I think it's a good idea? If you want to go get a vaccine, please do. I've had both mine. Quite honestly, the reason is because I can't afford to be sick. I'm too busy, is why I did it. But at what point do we, first of all, this COVID it's a serious thing. I'm not going to downplay it at all, but I also think that it was blown out of proportion. And partly because I don't think anybody really knew what to expect. But once it started coming out and they started saying all of these things, I think they had to double down. I don't think they wanted to say, well, maybe we overreacted. And I think they're still doubling down on some of this stuff. Do I think President Biden would have been elected if it wasn't for COVID? My personal opinion is no. You know, when they talked about keeping him in the basement, they literally kept him in the basement. So COVID's done a lot of damage to this country, not just from health-wise of, you know, and God bless the people that lost families or lost members of their families or got sick, because that is not a good thing. But we've been through a lot of things in the history of America, and never did we shut down our country the way we did.
So we know that people have quit their jobs because they don't want to take it, and we know that people have been fired because they didn't take it, and we also know that people are probably taking it so they can keep their jobs. I mean, it's just what do you think? How are you going to tackle this in the session, or will you? What are your plans?
Once again, we have one-person margin, so it's going to depend on whether we can come together as a bipartisan, or is it going to be strictly down the lines, and can we keep those 16 votes?
Is that a partisan issue, do you think?
I think it can be.
It seems like it is.
Well, I will tell you, yes, it can be. You know, I can tell you, even here in the Senate, last year when COVID started, the big debates about whether we should all wear a mask or not. And we did. I stepped out there and I got a little flack for it, and I just said, look, we want to get through this session. We don't know what's going to come, how bad this is going to be. So right off the bat, we did. We used masks in certain situations. We did a lot of Zooming so that, when I say close the building was open, but the public, didn't have huge crowds down here, because we were waiting to see what the effect was this going to be as we went through session. Once we realized how bad it was and how bad it wasn't, at that point we started saying, okay, now we're going to start, now that we understand what this is all about, now we're going to start letting people make their own decisions. And as you saw, what happened is most of the Democratic members, for a while anyway, most now they're not wearing them, but they wanted to wear their mask every day, and most of the Republicans said, we're not going to. So to solve that problem, all the Democrats are all on one side of the chambers floor, and all the Republicans are on the other side. And my rule is okay, you guys do not go over there if you don't have a mask on, out of respect for them. And you guys over here with masks, if you go to that side of the room, don't be belly aching that they don't have a mask on. So we're just trying to solve everything here.
And I want to input something too, because I've been a student of leadership for a long time. And one of the things I do want to say, because our president has gotten blasted on so many things, and most everything has been unfair. But with her leadership to walk us through this, I think has been phenomenal. And I'm not just saying this because she's here. I think that's one of the things, some of the other things we've talked about, the problems we're having is because of a lack of effective leadership. But that's where it takes leadership, and sometimes it isn't comfortable when you have, people on both sides of the aisle having a problem with you for one thing or another. But I do want to say that she has, I think, exercised some strong leadership and maneuvered our ship through this very rough seas of the COVID. And I think we've handled it very well. We're looking forward to another session. with less restraints and getting much more back to normal. But I do want to applaud the president for just the way she handled all of that, because I've been under other leadership that wasn't nearly as wise and tactful.
I think the whole COVID thing has been really odd and difficult for a lot of people. You mentioned the economy is doing well right now. It seems like you got some people out there that seem to have a lot of money and other people who are really struggling because of it. We know a lot of people lost their jobs because of the pandemic, but now we know there's a lot of businesses struggling to find employees because I don't know. I don't know why people aren't working, but it seems like there are so many jobs out there. What are you going to be talking about as far as jobs go in the state?
Well, and that's a really good question, because how do you get people to go back to work? We know that most of the extra federal dollars, the subsidies to unemployment have quit, but it's my understanding that there's still a bunch out there for childcare and some other avenues where people are thinking, well, I don't have to go back to work quite yet. But it is a conundrum, right? We are trying to figure out, before COVID, everybody that wanted a job, there was jobs, people were working, making money, and then all of a sudden COVID hits and nobody wants to work anymore. And I'm using that term nobody loosely, but we have, even in the construction field, these are $20, $30 an hour paying jobs just to start out, and people don't want to take those jobs. It's just, the construction industry is going nuts right now, and they cannot keep up just because nobody wants to work. I don't understand it, to be honest with you. I don't know how they're living and surviving.
Do you think it was a result of the federal subsidies, or more COVID, or businesses shutting down and people losing their jobs, or was it a combination of everything, do you think?
Yes. So one of the things is, the subsidies. So now everybody, well, not everybody, but a lot of people, they're getting not only their state unemployment, but now they're getting this bump on the other, and they're making more money than they did working. That was a pretty nice thing. Many of them were getting their mortgage payments either paid or waived, so they didn't have to pay their mortgage. And all of a sudden you're off for 6 months, a year, 18 months. You don't have to go to work, and the prospect of going back to work is, well, I kind of like sleeping in the morning. I like, going to the beach in the afternoon or the lake or wherever, because it's not just Arizona, it's countrywide. And I think people have gotten out of that habit of going to work and feeling that self-worth of being able to make money. I think part of it is, I think some families have realized that what they thought they needed, the 2 incomes, I think that they realized when they had that time off and they maybe were homeschooling kids or spent more time with their kids, I think they reevaluated their lives the way we did back in the 50s and 60s and early 70s, that do we really need 2 incomes, or can we get by with 1 and have more family time? Now that is a good thing that came out of COVID,
Right,
because
yeah.
I believe there are a number of families that said, you know what, I think we can do without 2 incomes. I think that's part of it.
So you mentioned the economy's doing well, the state has money right now. Schools are always a big issue, of course. How much will that be talked about in the session, in getting schools who perhaps have lost money during the pandemic because of smaller enrollments?
True. Well, I wouldn't say they've actually lost money, because there were a lot of federal monies that came to the schools, and we as a body, the legislative body and our governor, we have pumped a lot of money into education over the last 4 years particularly. So we have, there was a lot of money coming in, there was a lot of federal money coming in. Have they lost some revenues from what we call butts in the seats, ADM? That's true, but they still had that money coming in through other sources, through COVID dollars and emergency funds, federal and state level. So, Senator Gray, do you want to add to that?
Well, and I don't have the latest numbers for the total income for K-12, but the year before, their total income, when you consider the federal, the state, the local taxes, so forth, it was larger than our general fund budget. I mean, they had more money to disperse than we had as a state. So, there may be this, hand-wrenching going, we don't have any money. Well, there's a lot, and then as the president said, the COVID money on top of that. There's money there. How it's handled, I'm not sure, but education has always been a top priority for us. I know since I've been down, and I think we might have come in at the same time, it's always been a top issue for our Republican caucus. And now we're in a situation to where we're actually, we've had more money in the last few years, but that's been because of the policies that we put in place. When we came in, it was we had a big economic downturn, and our focus was how do we create the kind of environment, economic environment, that would be an engine which would draw businesses, grow businesses, create more jobs. And that's what we've done over this last decade. We've created this economic engine, and it's working. The COVID issue has been a little bit of a setback, and there's some potential issues of where that may exacerbate the problem too, just in the fact that a lot of the money that some of these places got, they ended up investing in higher salaries. Well, so when the COVID money comes away or goes away, then the state's going to have to come in and then match those higher salaries. So that's going to be a factor.
Can I just ask one?
Yeah. If you have a final question or final points, we have a couple of minutes left. And if you need
One more question. I know this is going long.
question too.
Regarding
You always do.
regarding mandates for masks in schools, it's so odd right now because some schools, they're like, if you're exposed, you're okay, stay at school. Others, I had a woman reach out to me. Her daughter had to go home to quarantine 5 times for like 15 days each time. I mean, how does a student learn? Will it ever be uniform across Arizona, or is it going to be a school issue?
I think it's going to be a school issue. It's going to be one of the school boards and the parents of that school district that is going to have to make some decisions about what's best for their school district. You kind of chuckled about what we did out here on the floor and said, okay, you guys with masks on this side and the other. Maybe the schools ought to look at that. Maybe they ought to, if there's 2 third-grade classes, maybe if the parents are equally split on mask or no mask, maybe they ought to say, okay, no mask over here and mask over here. There's got to be a solution that will address the concerns of all parents, because you can't do one size fits all, because it doesn't. And we're seeing more and more reports right now of the ill effects, not only from kids wearing masks. There's physical effects now attacking, but look at what it's done to our education system. Kids have literally lost well over a year of their entire education. That can't go on. We better fix it now.
And I do think we have to be careful, because when we do have this diversity and it is local control, sometimes it's easier to just say, we're going to superimpose on you what we want. And we're seeing the feds do that now. But that's inappropriate. And so anytime there's problems, we want to fix the problems. But when government starts coming in and saying, no, we are going to superimpose this solution for you, it exacerbates problems. And again, we're set up and structured so we do have local control. We need to maintain that, so there will be problems with that. We need to allow that process to work those problems out, as the president said, each school district and each school. If we start saying we need to control that, we have probably a greater intent to do more damage than we will do good.
Okay. Arnold, go ahead.
My question, look at him when you ask the question. In regards to immigration and people that don't want to work American, I've always wondered, why don't we go after the companies that hire the illegal immigrants? You go to the Phoenician right now, they're setting up, when the Phoenix Open, they're setting up for a huge event. You can go and round up a lot of illegal immigrants. The resorts are full of them. I feel like if we enforce strict penalties on people who are hiring, maybe the problem will go away.
Well, I'll address that as a business owner in construction, particularly because that's always been a big issue for a lot of people. Up until the last couple of years, that's a great suggestion, is that, somebody has got to enforce the laws. If the federal government and ICE isn't doing it, who is going to do that? Personally, my feeling is they never should have gotten across the border to begin with. And this has been going on for decades and decades. If we were doing our job by securing our borders and making sure everybody that came in legally, either through a visa process or however they were coming in, we wouldn't have this problem. So this isn't just this political atmosphere right now. It's been going on a long time. The caveat to that right now is, what do we do if we don't have Americans willing to work right now, and we're not going to allow non-citizens to work? Now we've really put ourselves in a pickle, and we did it to ourselves.
Well, I'd agree with that, and I do think that we definitely need to look at our whole immigration process. You know, as a nation, we're not having as many babies as we need to actually fill spots. So to look strategically, holistically, we need to look at that, but it needs to be legal and not illegal. And again, unfortunately, that's used more as a tool, a political tool, than it is an issue that they really want to solve in DC. And that's unfortunate, and it's painful for everybody, for the people that are here illegally and legally. It's not the right way to do it. But again, if we don't have leadership that's willing to take on the task and say, let's address this holistically, we'll never solve the problem.